Welcome to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast all about stories of safety leadership, presented by Dale Carnegie and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals.
Again, we have this opportunity today to meet with another individual who has committed his life and his work to the safety and well-being of other people. And we're going to have a great opportunity to learn about his big safety challenge to learn and help us. So Jay, get us rolling.
Thank you, Merle. We are thrilled to welcome Andrew Wehr today in studio to tell us about his career in environmental health and safety. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Andrew, how in the world, we always find this fascinating, how in the world did you ever get started into committing yourself to work with folks in their safety and their well-being?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I was blessed to have two very, very supportive parents who kind of, had a little bit of a servant leadership model and definitely a propensity for hard work. And so especially my father, had me in factory stacking boxes, as early as he could, just that type of thing. And so, I like a lot of kids coming out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do for sure. And ended up, going to Ohio State University and put pre-med on my application, thinking that might get me a scholarship. It didn't. But I went through the pre-med program for about 6 months. And I think 2 cadavers later, I thought, I don't know, this may not be for me. And so, interestingly, my safety career really didn't start necessarily in college. I found my way into environmental science and engineering at Ohio State, built wetlands of all crazy things, and did undergraduate research more on the environmental side. But then when I got out of college, I worked some pretty heavy industrial jobs, refractories and steel type companies. And those companies hire you in as an environmental health and safety person. And I kind of learned the safety side both on the job, but then also through like OSHA 30 hours and different, got my ASP and CSP and did a lot of, kind of on the job learning. And then at some point, safety actually became more of my day to day, even than environmental. So it's kind of odd. My 2 degrees are in environmental, but my career's been a span of all those types of things.
And from your viewpoint, what did you find about safety that began to intrigue you compared to the environmental?
Yeah, I the thing about safety, same thing about wanting to be a medical professional, right? You want to help others, right? And you feel good about helping others. It's kind of, again, back to that servant leadership type thought process. And so it just kind of came natural. I enjoyed making things less risky. I enjoyed working with people at all levels of the organization. I enjoyed watching injury rates go down, things of that nature, getting grant money for ergonomic improvements, all those kinds of things. And it just kind of felt natural. And so it was easier to learn on the job, I think, than environmental. So I probably wouldn't have done it any other way.
And Jay, there were 2 things that he said that I thought in his growing up that were great qualities of a safety professional. One, his parents taught him about being a servant leader. That's huge. 2, they taught him to work hard, which is critical for any safety professional. What else have you been noticing or you're curious about?
I'm curious about the snowball effect into safety. Starting pre-med, snowballing into a little bit of environment, snowballing into safety, working at the factory. And how did that grip you early on? And Merle asked a little bit about it, but that attraction, was that more with people and working with people and rolling it into a lifelong safety career? Because it certainly, like a lot of us, wasn't that instantaneous, hey, I'm going into environmental health and safety.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of fell into this career, right? Like a lot of people fall into their careers. It wasn't something I had been passionate about as a young boy. But I found I loved it. I found that I enjoyed working across a, kind of a matrixed organization of operations leaders, finance leaders, which I will say, we can talk a little bit about that. I think as you progress in your safety career, having good business acumen can really help propel you forward if you want to get in those bigger roles. I love working with people. And I love the diversity of the job where one day you might be on the shop floor with the maintenance person, and the next day you might be in a meeting with the founder of the company talking about a new project or a new piece of equipment, right? So I love the diversity of who you got to work for and work with. Um, and then it kind of came natural. It's very much like the medical professional. You just want to continuously try to make things better in the work environment.
Well, take us down that path. We've had some strong conversations over the past couple podcasts about understanding business acumen, finances, EBITDA in one of our earlier podcasts today. What advice would you give the safety professional about business acumen and stepping out of your comfort zone from EH&S into, say, finance, into, say, HR, into operations, into logistics?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical if you want to kind of grow and scale your career, right? So I started in a very heavy industrial. You were a jack of all. You were a jack of all trades. You were a one man EH&S person at the plant, and you had to do everything. But those were such formative years because you got to know a lot about a lot of things. Now, maybe you weren't a subject matter an expert, but you knew everything from fall protection to confined space entry, right, to risk assessment, everything you needed to know. So those first few years, if you're going to stay in this career, get in one of these jobs that just exposes you to everything, right? And exposes is on a non-IH perspective. But even that, industrial hygiene, right? I mean, I had to deal with crystalline silica and respiratory protection. And I mean, so many important topics that you got just thrown into and you had to learn. If you do that and you spend time getting a great foundation, the sky's the limits for if you want to go bigger in your career. And I mean, you can make a very nice life in this profession, especially there's big multinational corporations. You can travel, you can do all these things. But I would say the number one thing that I would recommend to a person newer in this field, if you want to go bigger and you want to lead people in EH&S and safety, if you want to work for these big multinational companies, consider at least getting some kind of a business degree or an MBA if you can. So, as we talked about hard work, I did both my grad programs at nights and on weekends while still working, right? So that was a long period of time. My wife was an angel, and she kept everything going at home while I was on weekends in getting a master's degree in this space. But then I realized that you're halfway there to an MBA, and if you can do some kind of business training and business degree, now you can start talking with your CFO. Now you can put business cases together to get funding for your ergonomics project. And you can talk that lingo that the C-suite speaks. You can start to think about being in some of these higher level roles. So business degree, or at least some business training, is absolutely paramount in my perspective.
And sometimes it's a trap, Andrew, that people say, well, I know the safety stuff. That's where I'm all about. Yet they don't always realize how they limit their ability to influence by not being able to talk that language and understand what people are saying. It's huge. In your role, I've heard you say already, you've got to deal with those things, because if you didn't, Jay, you wouldn't be respected or counted upon.
Yeah, but if I would have taken Andrew's advice earlier in my career and I had a mentor to tell me all those things, I probably would have been probably much better than I am now. I mean, it's taken me 30 years to learn that business acumen, to understand what earnings before interest and taxes and amortization is, and how important that is to the business. It's taken me my whole career. But you're listening to this podcast, and we're getting advice on selling safety. We're getting advice on mentoring and continuous improvement, and now we're getting advice on business acumen. Those are the things we don't leave college with as environmental health and safety professionals. So I think it's wonderful to expand upon those points with Andrew here today.
You said a word, selling, too. I will say I am a bit of a salesman, right? So I don't mind selling the value proposition of safety, why it's important. You can sell it to the heart, but you also have to sell it to the bottom line. What's that return on investment? Why should they invest in this palletizer, so we don't have to hand stack to the floor or a lift table, right? Those kinds of things. You not only have to have the business acumen, but you got to be able to stand up in front of people, including a CFO, and explain risk reduction, cost of ergonomic claims, cumulative trauma disorder costs, and be able to sell it. And if you can do that at the C-suite level, you can have a huge impact, even globally in these multinational corporations.
Let's say that for one reason or another, a person could not get into an advanced degree just right now. What are another idea too that you'd give to somebody that said, I need to start sharpening my financial ability? What would you recommend for them to do?
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about mentorship, right? It's easy, it's cheap, it's free to find a mentor, and don't be afraid to go up to somebody in finance or even your CFO and say, "Hey, I would like to understand EBIT, or I'd like to understand some of these terminology of how do I write a business case?" And try to get a mentor, maybe 2 levels or more above your current role, that will guide you in some of these things, right? And put it on your personal professional development plan, right? Most companies, when they do your objectives for the year, you also have a personal kind of development plan option, and a mentor can be great. And certainly even outside the EHS space, I would actually recommend, if you've got the technical skills in EHS, look for a mentor somewhere else, to grow that other side of you.
That's been a key theme we've been talking about in season 4 of this podcast, is the importance of mentoring, and probably every guest we've had has mentioned it unsolicited.
Yes.
And that's a key point for people.
Yeah.
How would you recommend we find our mentor? Or how would you recommend to the people listening to find, what would be your approach to finding a mentor?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it may not even be called a mentor, right? I've always had somebody that I think I felt like was helping me, watching over me, I knew I could trust. So if you have that person that just kind of happens organically, I would maybe start talking to them, and that may be the person, or they may recommend somebody else. Obviously, you're working, your supervisor, your boss, whatever, you probably want to talk about mentorship through them and that type of things. But I've always found that you kind of know who's in your circle of trust and who has your best interests in mind. And maybe start there. Again, I always think 2 levels above has a little bit different perspective than yours. And so start talking to somebody. If you're a manager, talk to somebody who's a senior director or a VP and see what their perspective is on that. And again, then you can always go to human resources and your employee resource groups and things like that.
Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We're going to talk in a little while about a safety challenge that you've had to face, because many of our folks are living with challenges. We'd like to hear, though, about a success that you've seen, something that when you look back over your career of working, and by the way, we probably should have you describe a bit of where you work at now, where you worked at, involved with that. But as you're doing that, think of something, it's a shining moment you look back and say, that worked. That was a great success.
Yeah. My career has been what I would call more of a builder than a polisher. And that's a phrase we use sometimes. It depends on what type of company you're going to. If you're going to a company that has a well-established EHS system, right? Maybe they're already ISO 14 and 45,000. Maybe they've got their management system down. You're going to have probably a different experience where you're coming in and you're filling a specific type of role, right? It might be a little bit more narrow focused. For whatever reason, I think a lot of my opportunities have been more in the startup and creation of departments, and more of the builder of those departments. And so we mentioned I worked for a refractory, which kind of a earthen material, kind of looks a lot like cat litter, but it's used in the steel industry as an insulator, very heavy industry. That was your traditional in-plant EHS, every single topic you could imagine, right? You're the only EHS person there, right? So you're doing all these things. Unbelievable experience. But fast forward, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, so there was a company called Limited Brands, Les Wexner's organization, that owned lots of retail brands, Express, Bath & Body Works, Victoria's Secret, a whole bunch of brands. But behind all that was everything from the sourcing, the distribution, right, the store safety side of things. So you wouldn't necessarily think of retail and EHS necessarily synonymous with each other, but they have their own issues.
Yes.
And then the distribution centers and the products that have to be made either in the U.S. or out of the U.S., all of that has a lot of EHS implications. And it was interesting at the time. I joined Limited Brands in '99 to build out their first ever EH&S department and program.
Wow, so you were a trailblazer.
Well, but at that point in my career, there was a person above me, a great mentor and coach named Greg Cunningham. And he was certainly my elder, but he hired me in as a manager of EHS to help build this out. So it wasn't like I was doing it on my own. And I spent 6 years with Greg and his team just creating this thing from scratch, from everything from written programs to what metrics we're going to track to training program, everything that has to be built, right? We built it from scratch at Limited Brands. And over those 6 years, you went from kind of an individual contributor at a single site role to a builder in a multi-business unit type role, right? They had a lot of different brands, different business units, and a lot of different work environments. I had never been in malls and stores from a safety perspective, but that was a eye-opening experience when you have to change over floor sets, typically with a female population in a lot of cases late at night. There's security implications, there's physical, hazards and things of that nature. So I learned a lot, certainly learned a lot about distribution. And that allowed me then to really propel my career where Cardinal Health, which is a huge $160 billion global medical device, medical distribution and pharmaceutical distribution company, kind of said, hey, we need you to do the exact same thing, but we want you to do it on a global scale. Like, we're a collection of companies. We've never consolidated EHS under one operating system. We want you to come in and just organize it, build it out on a much grander scale. Would you be interested? And a piece of advice: don't ever say no. Unless you really have to. But if you can say yes, try to say yes.
That is a great piece of advice, because what happens when we say no too often?
Don't let fear get in your way. Some of the stuff that you fear, most of it doesn't come true. Like, most of the time, it's a lot better than you think it could be. And I know we talk a little bit about you get nervous and can I do these kind of things? Generally, you can, right? You'll figure it out. Smart people, good people figure it out. So I would say try to lead with yes, or no, but I need these things to make this happen. And if you can work through that, take that leap of faith, and your career can just expand exponentially if you say yes more than you say no.
And Dale Carnegie, in his book, was talking about fear, and he said the big ships push away from the shore. And he said, just in the same way, if you want to go somewhere, if you want to accomplish something, you can't stay nearby. You got to be willing to go out into the deep water and face the fear. It's in your head, and go on past what's in your head. So solid advice.
Yeah. I was a small town kid from Westerville, Ohio, right? I'd never been to Thailand or Malaysia or Juarez, Mexico, or any of these places, but I learned to love it, and meeting new people, new cultures, right? Just learning about other cultures and people and how they just do life, right? It was amazing while you're still doing safety work. I couldn't be more thankful for kind of how that career had panned out. And so, I would say the pinnacle or the large part of 15 years with Cardinal Health was trying to take all these disparate businesses and pull them together under some kind of single EHS operating system, which we ended up going down the ISO route. So we did the ISO 14001 and 45000 path. And in the end, you said, a proud moment. We were able to get group certification with about 2 to 3 years of effort across 20 plus plants for ISO certified in both environmental and health and safety. So that was a model that we pursued, and it was something we accomplished. And I think that was really a proud moment to see that happen.
And Andrew, I think that many of our folks do work in organizations where they have global reach. What would you encourage folks about working with people from different cultures about handling safety and approaching it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I had to learn that, right? I didn't come natural. I would say the first thing, if you are going to get into a global role, do some research on the culture, right? Like, especially there's different religious practices, there's different times when people need to pray. There's a lot of different cultural practices, and you need to be somewhat functional in knowing what that is so that you don't come in blind to those types of situations. So I know whenever I would fly to Asia or whatever, I would be reading on the plane, like keeping up with that, and was by no means an expert, but at least I had a working knowledge of how this would take place. And I think you need to be very respectful of that, right? You want to come in and make sure you just don't bulldoze your way through. You got to be sensitive to that. So I would try to listen and learn and take it in before immediately just stepping forward and saying, trying to take action and try to embed yourself in the culture. I'd stay two weeks or so, try to stay with my local EHS manager and his family and just try to assimilate yourself a bit so that you can make impact, but in a way that they respect.
And how did you manage your patience and kind of pressures to walk in somewhere in a different country and you're learning their culture, you're understanding what's going on, seek first to understand before being understood. You're looking at something, let's say it's not an imminent danger, because I'm quite confident you'd probably go after that pretty quick. But let's use safety shoes as an example. Well, this is 100% flip-flops in this factory, but I'm pretty sure that you should probably be wearing closed-toed shoes or something at that level. How did you manage more the patience and the resistance to jump on a different country as you're trying to learn their culture?
Yeah, I mean, different cultures have different risk tolerances, right? And
Yep.
and their perception of risk is different. There's a period where you need to build trust and rapport in any culture, right? So there's that period, and it does take a little bit of time. You can't just jump in, or it won't have. They might smile and nod their head and say yes, but the minute you leave, it's going to go right back to the way it was. So there's a little bit of needing to build relationships and trust at both the leadership level and at the supervisory and the shop floor level. But then there's a bit of education too, right? I mean, you can educate, and actually in some cases, like I will say I worked a lot in Thailand, you have to reverse explain to them why I don't want you to stick your hand in this machine to get the widget out. Right? That's not what the company wants of you, because they will want to do something for they'll want to better the company. And in their mind, getting that widget out of the machine when it jams is a good thing for the company. So there's a little bit of education around, the what can happen with these kind of behaviors. Thank you. And I think with a little bit of trust, a little bit of education, even photos sometimes are great. You can start to make some progress there where, maybe they were just doing things that we wouldn't necessarily do in the States.
So you were a builder again at Cardinal Health. You helped get this whole structure set up together. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously had a great team, right? And I think that's another point. I mean, you've got to hire great people, right? But yeah, we had a great team at Cardinal Health, and it was fun watching over 15 years kind of from where it came, which wasn't necessarily in a bad spot. It just wasn't in an organized kind of one central management system concept, a bunch of basically different companies doing their own things, to kind of bringing it all together in some form of standardization that you felt comfortable that all the right things were happening through a little bit more structured kind of top-down management system approach.
You mentioned a phrase there, hiring the right people.
Yeah.
And I found, Andrew, that everybody that's ever done hiring, they have a hall of fame. They'll say, oh, yeah, I hired this person. I hired her. Yeah, great people. And we've all got that hall of shame that we didn't quite pick so well.
If you've never hired anyone, you've never made a mistake.
True. So wouldn't it be good if Andrew could just give us a few thoughts that you've learned about hiring safety professionals?
Yeah. I mean, we talk a little bit about, like, in a lot of people's profession, you're going to transition if you go further up in a company. You're going to be an individual contributor a lot of, the beginning of your career, most likely. Excuse me. But then you're going to eventually have people that work for you, and there's turnover, and eventually you might need to hire somebody. If it's not the most critical thing, I mean, it's an extremely critical job. Making the right hire, it defines, kind of what successes you're able to have. So, I would say hire tough, right? Don't necessarily just jump, what seems great at the very, beginning with a few conversations. Really do your homework, have multiple people interview somebody, not just EHS, but have them look for different skill sets and behaviors. Because if you make a great hire, it will provide dividends for years and years to come. The converse of that is we've all made a couple bad hires, And I've made some that looked great on the surface, just paper, resume looked phenomenal. Background looked great, perfect for the role, but maybe their decision making and ethics on how they look at things, or maybe there's some metrics that need to be reported, and maybe they just have a tendency to shave some of the numbers down so they look a little better. Those types of things, if you start to get people in your organization like that can spiral in the opposite direction, right? And so hiring, do your homework, have a cross-functional, diverse group of people to interview them. Don't just hire on the first conversation. Really do your homework.
And sometimes I'm glad you addressed something, that we have this idea that, I got to hurry up and get somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an idea, Merle. It is real factual pressure.
Well, it is from above.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need it, but sometimes the people above you are saying, hi. But we have to remember, it's the idea. You either pay it now or you pay it later.
Mm-hmm.
You may take time now, and it may take longer, and hopefully you get the right person, or you can do it quick, but you'll pay it later.
Yeah,
no doubt.
You just decide when you want to pay it, and that's a big deal. Are there any particular character qualities for a safety professional, Andrew, that you think are critical? I mean, all character things are important, but just really stand out to you.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, right, you get hired for your technical skills in many cases, but you get promoted for your human skills, right? The skills that get you, to be successful in a cross matrix kind of highly, influential organization, right? So, again, I think empathy is always a great characteristic, that someone is humble and empathetic, but yet driven, right? I mean, you can be confident and you can be strategic and you can be thoughtful and you can exude confidence, but it doesn't mean you're arrogant, right? So we got into this field because we wanted to help people, right? And so I think the characteristics you look for in safety are, can they interact with all levels of the organization? Can they engage that person across from them, have them talk more than they talk, right? Can they, let that person build trust and rapport with them? Because once you then build that, the sky's the limits on what you can accomplish together. If you can't interact and build trust and rapport with other human beings, no matter what field you're in, right, you're going to struggle. So the technical side is required, but it's the human side and the people skills, right, that really make or break your career.
Well, we used to say, probably a little cruder than you did, we would say we hired for skills and we fired for attitude and that kind of thing. But I'm so glad you mentioned that idea about people skills, because, of course, in the Dale Carnegie organization, and that's why we partnered with BCSP, is just to say marvelous people that know their skills really well. But it is so much that ability to win the trust of people, earn their confidence, and then to be able to guide through those difficult things, because you're dealing in safety and safety decisions with the heart and the soul and the decision-making process of individuals. And you got to be able to reach into that.
And my EHS career now is very different than when I first started, right? I was a technical expert, right? I was educated in environment. I learned occupational health, industrial hygiene, and safety. That just felt natural because it's helping people. But as you got further in your career, it wasn't any more about you. It was about others, right? And it was more about vision, and you'd seen the technical side and all the aspects of that from a safety perspective. But you have to transition into, okay, now I know, like, visionary, what I want to do. Like, I've seen what good looks like. I've seen it out there, right? I've benchmarked with other companies. And when you transition from this individual contributor to somebody who's a leader that just has a vision of what you want to do, but you're not going to be able to do it by yourself, right? And so one of the things I had to learn is that kind of a syndrome of, I'll just do it myself, right? Because I had always relied on, I'll just get it done. Like, I just work hard, I'll just outwork somebody, I'll get it done. But when you're trying to do something in scale, especially across multiple states or multiple plants or even multiple countries. You can't do it yourself. There's not enough hours in the day. And that's not a life to try to be 24/7, right? So you've got to transition from what got you to that point isn't going to get you to where you need to be next if you're going to transition into one of these EHS leadership roles. And so you've got to learn to work through others. And the way you do that, right, is hire great people, make them really excited about their job, make them know you care and truly care, right? They'll see through it if it's superficial. Learn their kids' names, learn their significant others' names, their pets' names, and care about them as human beings, your own people, because we're out there trying to care about other people we don't even know as much, right? And so if your people know you care about them, right? If that's who they'd want in the war, if they'd want you in their foxhole, right? And they would go to war with you, then you've got a good team, right? And I always just try to build that wherever I am, because what you can accomplish with a team that trusts each other is amazing, right? And then you just got to let them be successful, right? So you set them up with high level objectives and goals and all these things, but then let them run, right? And then you're just there to coach and guide and counsel, right? Versus do it for them. And I had to work through that because I'm a little bit of a just let me do it myself kind of mindset. And I struggled with that when I started leading people, of not doing it for them, right? And I still fall back on that default behavior at times, and I have to catch myself.
Well, there's another principle that Carnegie said, give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. And that sounds like what you were doing. You were hiring the right people, equipping them, and then gave them a vision you had for what they could do, or let them have that vision and let that reputation help them, drive them to help others and be successful.
Yeah, I think of it in very much like a Hoshin way. You as the senior leader can help set the strategy with others' input, but you've got to have that strategy. And then you build that down very granularly, right, to what their individual contributions are to that broader strategy. And if they understand the big picture of where you're going and their part in it, they get really excited on the vision of where we're headed because they know they're contributing to that, right? And it's a little bit of a pyramid type concept or Hoshin mindset that kind of flows from top down, from a vision all the way down to the very granular tactical actions and activities that they're doing. But they're excited because they know why they're doing that and they know why it makes a difference. And then you're just there to support them and guide them and coach and counsel and just let them run. Yeah. Let good people run.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Jay, what are you thinking?
Let good people run. That's what I'm thinking. I'm writing that down.
Run, Forrest, run. Yeah. Yeah. But now you transitioned after Cardinal Health.
I did. It was another building opportunity. It was another
He's
building.
A builder.
It was another building, and I had no intention of leaving. I love Cardinal Health, right? We had a great thing going, and I could have easily worked there the rest of my career. Sometimes opportunities pop up. Don't take a lot of recruiter calls, but occasionally one pops up. You're like, well, this one I should at least listen to. And Rivian was another opportunity. It's a new electric vehicle startup company. Right? They're making the Amazon vans, and they have the R1 pickup truck and the R1S SUV electric vehicles. And they were starting. They kind of had some semblance of an EHS organization, but didn't have anybody over top of kind of pulling it all together. And so that was a really amazing 2.5 years experience of true startup. Like this, automotive companies in the U.S. don't typically start up, other than the big three, and a lot of them that have tried have not been very successful. So there's a little bit of a risk reward here, but it was an opportunity to get into automotive, which was an area I had never been in. I had been in a lot of different businesses, but never automotive, and so that was. If you ever worked for a startup, it's close to 24/7. It's a crazy environment, but a lot of fun, a lot of great people, amazing product, and really enjoyed my time there.
Would you say that was significantly out of your comfort zone when you left Cardinal Health?
EHS applies a lot across all industries. The fundamental principles apply across all industries. But there's always nuances to each type of industry. Like I'm sure logging is a lot different than automotive, is a lot different than food manufacturing, which is where I am now. So there are differences. There's differences in making heart stents, right, to making salad dressing. But the principles are the same. The people skill aspects are the same. You just have to learn that industry a little bit. And then there is a learning curve there for sure.
Yep.
The daringness and the self-confidence within to say, I can take on something new. Sounds like it kind of goes back to your statement, don't be afraid to say yes and try to avoid no when you can, because the confidence lets you move forward into areas you don't feel real comfortable with.
Oh, I mean, you're not going to grow unless you say yes, most of the time, or at least part of the time. And it's okay. Like if we go back to fear, right? You can say yes. And my time with Rivian was a little bit shorter than I had expected, but there were various reasons, right? And my family's in Columbus, and where Rivian needed me was not in Ohio, right? And so you go through a lot of travel, a lot of time away, and there was reasons to come back home, basically. But saying yes, I mean, you grow tremendously. You get new experiences, right? And I wouldn't give that up for anything. You meet amazing people. You build relationships that you wouldn't have otherwise built. And it kind of also goes back to fear. You can worry about saying yes and what's all the bad things that could happen if I say yes, but think of all the good things that can happen if you say yes. And typically, more good things happen than bad. And the bad things we can work through because you're still very talented. You're good at what you do. And it's not like you're not going to find work somewhere if it doesn't pan out. All times you say yes don't pan out perfectly, right? I mean, there's a lot of challenges. And in my case, I needed to kind of come home and be home a little bit more. So, did it work out perfectly? No, but thank God you said yes because you got that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can work through any of the headwinds that get thrown your way. You can work through those.
Now, Carnegie also wrote another book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. The whole idea of dealing with stress and worry. And one of the principles he taught in there was to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? In your case, you could have been overwhelmed by all these, well, what if I go to this startup? What if I do that? But what's the worst that could happen? Okay, you'd have to look somewhere else someday or whatever like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very manageable, right? So lead with yes. Say yes when you can, right? I have an amazing spouse, and she rarely tells me that I have to say no on anything, right? She's like, hey, it's up to you. Whatever you decide, we'll make it work. So that's helpful to have a spouse that's very supportive and a significant other that lets you say yes and is flexible enough to, adjust her own ways of doing things so that, I can, say yes at times to certain things in my career. But to your point, the stuff you worry about most time doesn't even come true. And if it does, you work through it and you'll be fine.
So quite honestly, Jay, there could be people that are listening to this podcast because we're talking to a bunch of human beings out there who tend to have these fears that can be big and big and big and grow bigger and bigger. Kind of like the dreams at nighttime of when you're a kid of what's that ghost that's hiding under the bed, right? Or wow. But to realize, face it head on and don't be afraid to take a step forward. And it's worth the while. Let's get to your last place then that you're working at. This is a fascinating progression here.
Well, I mean, I love new things. I work for the Marzetti Company, which is an amazing food company. They manufacture food products. There's a little bit of a story with Marzetti's. I actually worked at their factory in Columbus, Ohio at night while I was at college at Ohio State to help pay for school. Again, my father and my mother could have paid for all my school, but again, at their principles, I needed to work for it. So I would do school, I would do research, on wetlands of all things, and that paid for half my school. And then the second part of my school was paid for by working at the Marzetti food production facility right up the street from Ohio State's campus. And I would work in the quality assurance lab at night and test products and do analytical stuff, but it paid the bills. Right. So I had a little bit of experience with Marzetti, just knowing of that company, but never intended that I would, go back there after like a college job. They're headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. And again, I think we talked a little bit before the podcast. Both my parents and my wife's parents are in Columbus. So we've made a conscious decision to look after them as they looked after us as we were growing up and that type of thing. So Columbus is home, and this opportunity to work in food manufacturing again. And a company that ironically I had worked for in the 90s was just too good to pass up, and just an amazing opportunity. So it's saying yes to another industry. And so I'm seeing it now, 15 different plants typically across the US, plus or minus. Where I worked there before, just kind of to get, just to make money for college. Now I'm seeing it from an EH&S perspective, right? In a whole nother light, but very enjoyable. And we call it the Better Food Company because the way they treat their people there, I'd put it up against anybody, right? The culture that Dave Szynski, the CEO, and others have set.
Give us a little example of what makes it so good.
Oh, I mean, just all the principles we talked about in Dale Carnegie, right? About how you treat people and just, how you interact with folks. No company's perfect, right? A company's made up of a lot of different individuals. But if you look at just the culture that's been set and how you treat people and how we thank people and show appreciation and there's a lot of great principles there under the umbrella called the Better Food Company that just make make people want to stay, right? I mean, there's a lot of lifetime people there because you just enjoy what you're doing.
And could we say just a moment, how much does company culture affect the world of safety?
Oh, I mean, I think it's paramount. I mean, at the end of the day, you can talk about safety or you can actually, walk the walk when it comes to safety. Because everybody, says they care about safety, right? It's like arguing against mom and apple pie. But do you really see it when production pressures mount or we've got a new order from a customer? What do you stand for, right? Are we going to let somebody do something we otherwise wouldn't have because we're under pressure to start up a new production facility or something, right? And so that's when you fall back to the core principles and core values of a company. And again, it's made up of individuals and no company's perfect. And at times we all err. But I'd say if you're grounded in just your core belief that there's nothing more important than food safety and people safety, it's pretty easy to kind of make your decisions with those tenets in mind, right? And I think Marzetti's has done an amazing job with that, and we're building on that. We got a long ways to go, but it's really enjoyable work, and it feels very rewarding at this stage of my life to just feel great again about what you're doing. So.
Andrew, I have to ask this question. It's a twofold question. What was the gap between when you worked there in college and when you've gone back in years? And did they remember you?
The gap was I worked there from 92 to 95. I'm showing my age here. I'm a little over 50 years old. And yes, they did. They did because they were.
I assume in a positive way.
It looks like to be a positive.
Well, they hired me again, so they must have been somewhat positive.
Would you rehire this person? Right?
I would say a lot of people have turned over, obviously, since then.
Sure,
but there's a core group there, and we talk about making lifelong friends. I had lifelong friends that still worked at Marzetti's, even from when I worked there in the 90s.
That's
so
great.
There was a few connections, right? That were still there. But yeah, I mean, the folks that have been there for a long time, we knew each other and it was fun to, reconnect again.
Andrew, think about, you've had an opportunity to touch and influence a lot of people's lives, people that worked for you and under you and with you, employees, and the reach of those safety professionals you guided in all these different ways. Tell us a little bit, as we're kind of wrapping up here, about the idea of the legacy that a safety professional would like to have.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't mind saying it, right? I mean, I'm in the latter part of my career. I've probably got 10 plus years, right, to keep doing this. We talked a little bit about it before, but it's really about others, right? Not necessarily about your career. So, you can in this profession get to a point where financially, I mean, you're not mega wealthy, but you're secure, right? And it actually takes some worry out of the mix too, right? Because when you're going to be okay financially too, right? You can say yes to these things. Mm-hmm. So at this point in my life, I don't have the pressure of, can you pay the bills, right? I mean, we've gotten to a point where you're financially secure. So it becomes more about others, and it becomes more about hiring great talent, maybe a little, earlier in their careers, trying to grow them and thinking about, gosh, who is going to be my, internal replacement? I mean, because my ideal situation is that I have a great transition in probably 10 years or whatever that ends up being with somebody who's already in place, right? We don't have to go to the outside. We've been grooming people to just step in and take bigger and bigger roles. And the thing I've enjoyed about Marzetti's is I've been able to hire and bring in some amazing talent. Actually, a lot of my teammates are female, and so these amazing women leaders, these strong female leaders, with aspirations of their own, maybe just a little bit younger in their careers. And so to be able to put development plans together over the years for them to go from manager, senior manager, director, right, and up through the ranks, I'm really looking forward to that over the next 10 years. And then I'll just step back, and I can't wait to see where it goes after that, right? Because I'm sure the next level of folks will take it to a place I never even envisioned.
And that is a life well lived.
It is 100% a great occupation to be in that's fulfilling and fun. And turn it over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, final thought.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, like we said before, I didn't pick this, it found me, right? But no matter where life finds you, right, I think you can make a really amazing life by some of the core principles, right, of being good human being and doing good to others, right? Some of these servant leadership type principles, no matter what field you're in. And if you apply those and people know you're coming from a great place of trust and just, they know what you're all about, you can accomplish great things, even in a highly matrixed organization with a lot of different priorities and type of thing. I couldn't be more thankful that I found this profession. It's given me a great life, and I love doing what we do. So I'm excited to go to work, every day. Even I don't get the Sunday scaries or anything.
Yeah.
I love what we do. It's difficult. It's not hard. It's not easy, right? I mean, deadlines, emails, metrics, they all pile up. But at the end of the day, there's a sense of pride in helping others and stepping back and looking at that. And I would encourage anybody, you can make a very good life in this field. And so, say yes to safety profession. It can be unbelievably rewarding.
Thank you so much for giving your time and your thought and your effort to being here with us and speaking to our podcast listeners along the way.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
I appreciate it.
One theme I heard repeatedly, Jay: say yes. Be open to opportunities. Be open to ideas. Say yes. Great advice for our folks.
Builder versus polisher, trust, mentor, hard work, servant leadership, hiring great people. Say yes.
That's it. Great things from Andrew's life and his work.
Thanks for listening to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast produced in partnership by Dale Carnegie and BCSP, with your hosts, Dale Carnegie Master Trainer Merle Heckman and Jay Harf, Vice President of Global Environment, Health, Safety, and Sustainability at Xylem. Executive produced by Charlie Eltringham. The supervising producer is Joel Burgai. Directed by Jiachi Liu. Edited by Jared Griot and Kyla Anderson. Editorial support from Brandon Mohawk. Social media support from Braylon Morgan and Evelyn Baku. Consulting producers are Colin Brown and Mark Sullivan. To have new episodes delivered directly to you, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. If you would like to share your story of a safety leadership challenge you faced, email us at info@mybigsafetychallenge.com. See you next time.